3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Picking it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As usual, we don't do opening statements, but if you want to ask some questions, and Becky, I know you've got one. What is it?
Yes, if we can. Becky Bohr, Associated Press. The budget includes $80 million that would would be put into the higher ed fund, and then a near equal amount would come out for TERS. Are you guys working on longer range plans, I guess, to address a different approach to TERS funding, or is this supposed to be seen as sort of a 1 year change in approach?
No, that's a really good question. It's been a topic of a lot of discussion. We will be looking at systemic changes, something that brings down the costs and relieves the state of some of those costs as well. We'll have a bill on that. I had assumed it was going to be read across today. Is it going to be today or tomorrow, the TERS bill? Tomorrow there will be a bill read across that will address that. What TERS specifically? And there was, did we include the PERS bill tomorrow? Just TERS? Just TERS? Right. No, my question was there a PERS bill introduced as well for tomorrow, or just the TERS now? Okay. TERS and PERS were the potential solutions. TERS is the big deal. Are both of them introduced, or just one? Just the TERS has been introduced? Okay, that's the point, is that the House solution, they were trying to ramp down the impacts of TERS payments over time. But the thing is that they didn't put any structural changes so that those savings went on into the future. I think because they're very busy, they're waiting for us to act through a bill that they can then either adopt or not adopt or change to their liking. But the fact is that we are going to be handling the structural changes, and that'll go from our body over to their body, and it should be out tomorrow. The one that's coming tomorrow is TERS specific. We'll discuss PERS later.
Becky, we're looking at a variety of systemic changes, and we spoke to that in our first press conference, and we're still trying to hammer those things out. You know, the general public seems to be, because of current media coverage, thinking that we're not acting on some of those revenue measures, and it's not the case. We're actually trying to get the homework done to be able to have a good conversation with Alaskans about particular issues. Today at the Finance Committee table, there's an amendment on aviation fuel, which is a very complex structure that is required by the federal government to actually track and dedicate those revenues to rural airports and otherwise. And so I went after that particular session and spoke with with Legislative Finance to talk about how that affects the bill that's coming forward by the governor in a proposition to raise some of those aviation fuels. And so how does that dedication look? How does it work? So we're working on those things every day. It's just it's not upfront and personal right now because we haven't had all of our questions answered and understanding the economic impact of some of those things, both for the businesses that utilize, specifically on this issue, the fuel, and then how that functions inside of the federal government mandates that we have, some of which are related to treaties and some of which are related to just general federal law.
And I think, at the early press conferences, we talked about offering a suite of bills that would result in structural change. You've seen, obviously, the tremendous amount of work that went into the Medicaid reform bill, and that's on its way from this committee. We'll have the TERS bill. The crime bill is going to get to us. Again, I don't have to know exactly the number that's going to come out of that, but we put kind of a placeholder in there of somewhere around $16 million. And these are year-by-year savings that go, they're huge savings over a period of time. I think the largest number that you get to in the Medicaid reform bill is $115 million per year, and that doesn't include so much of what's in that bill. And that's not a criticism of the administration. We did criticize them at first over the fiscal notes, but it's a conservative number, and I think it's way conservative for the amount of money that's going to change. So there are these bills that we've promised, and they are floating about. Most of them are coming from us, Senate Finance Committee, but some are coming from other places as well. And it's important that we have seen a history in this state, literally since statehood, of money going up and down, and it's always unpredictable. And we have talked about structural changes And now we're doing it. And one of the structural changes that we don't, it's a much larger discussion, but was SB 21 a few years ago, where your tax credits ramped down. We start seeing the largest ramp down that we've seen next year. 17, 18, yeah. So the suite of bills that we've talked about, they're on their way. You're starting to see them. Some of them have had such a life of their own that they don't look like, oh, that's that suite of bills that the Senate Finance Committee was talking about, because Medicaid reform is so so large. But that's a part of it, and so is crime, et cetera.
So far, in terms of the numbers, that's an issue that Senator Hoffman has talked about a lot. Can we expect a bill on community revenue sharing to come out of finance too, or is there going to be a longer-term bill on that?
I'm working on that to see if we can resolve and bring people together around an idea. A bill is an idea, and so we're talking to legislators in our body whether revenue sharing should continue along the same way. Should we let it ramp down as proposed in current Alaska state statute? Should we recharge it given the current financial difficulties that we're facing? Or should it be repurposed and totally taken apart and done differently? So those conversations are happening. You saw some of that expressed in the testimony that we received over the last 3 days. People are very anxious about that conversation. Communities depend on that money. We understand that. We really appreciate hundreds of Alaskans coming out over 6 hours and 3 days. We understand the issues that they were expressing concern and interest about. The House faced that and added to the budget for public radio. I'd say just in a general barometer, I don't have the stats to back it up right now, but over 75% of the testimony we received were supporting an increment to continue funding at a minimum at the governor's level for public radio. So I think we heard that loud and clear. The issue for the Senate is, folks, we're facing a $4 billion deficit, and what do we do? There is going to be casualty around the state that affect different communities in different ways, and so our job is to look at how those impacts might affect somebody and try to support people around Alaska, individuals, families, businesses, and then the economy as a whole, and how we move forward. And so that's why you don't see things racing out of the gate. We just really need to understand how people, business, and the economy as a whole are impacted. And, quite frankly, we're looking to the governor for some of that information, and it's been a little short. And so we're trying to figure out how to get the quantitative, qualitative information to make some of those decisions. And we'll certainly do everything we can our own to fully explore all of the governor's proposals.
I think one of the biggest, you just brought up the heart of the session, which is the $4 billion deficit. And what we heard was, I think, somewhat in opposition to what Mr. and Mrs. Alaska really think. We had a lot of testimony. It was valuable testimony. But what a lot of people say is that, tax me, take my PFD, whatever. As we go forward, we have to remember that what a taxing model would present us at this time, if we didn't make the appropriate reductions and make government smaller and better with the systemic changes built into it, then what we would be offering the people of Alaska is sustainable spending, not a sustainable budget. And our theme coming out of Senate Finance, and I think Senator McKinnon said it best the other day, we're not looking for sustainable spending, we're looking for systemic changes. And we'll get them, and it's going to be difficult, but that's one of the reasons why we want to get out of here budget-wise by May 15th. And let me just quickly take you through that schedule that's coming up. Today and tomorrow, the House will finish its business on their version of the operating budget. Today they will. They'll send that over to us. It'll get read across. So we'll have possession of the House bill. It'll get then sent to Finance tomorrow. We'll then order a CS, and we'll wait for it, and it'll show up, and we'll be able to go to the floor with it Saturday for second reading. While we're kind of going through the process, we can still continue with the amendments that we have before us. Do we know the specific amount of amendments that are yet to come? It's a handful of amendments. It's nothing compared to what you saw over in the House, but that'll be done today and tomorrow. Then we'll go to the floor on Monday. It'll be in third reading, but we'll go back to the second reading for purposes of amendments, and then it'll be passed, we hope, and we'll have reconsideration on the same day. It'll be sent to the House. They will fail to concur. I'm almost certain they will. And then a conference committee can be appointed at that point. It doesn't have to be, and I think that's an important distinction, is that it sounds as if we're trying to race towards a conference committee. What we're trying to race towards is the point where you can have a conference committee, and that conference committee starts when the president and the speaker name the conferees. What's important about it is then you go into the 24-hour rule. We've said this over and over again. That's the point where these systemic changes begin to move much more quickly, and we have a month to talk about earnings reserve, credits, PERS, TERS, other things.
Well, if I might, the general public voted for us to get our business done in 90 days. And from my perspective and the co-chairman's perspective, the only way we get there is if we accelerate the budget so that we have that conversation earlier in the session and not cost the people of Alaska money by bringing us back in for special session upon special session. This governor has made it very clear that he is not opposed to special sessions. That's his prerogative, but we are trying to attempt to get our business done inside of the 90 days. And so if we finish our budget and we propose a budget that we believe in, and the House proposes the budget they believe in, we can then negotiate and understand both from the minority's position and the majority's position what's important to them and the people of Alaska in trying to resolve our differences. And so at least that's my hope. My hope is to start conversations with both bodies, with majority and minority members, and be respectful of the general public and what the needs are that are being requested from us.
Yeah, and those conversations, and some of those conversations or arguments, they need to happen within a session. Last year, there was so much that happened at the end of session or even after session was over. And then people, unfortunately, when you're in a special session, the people who are recalcitrant, who want to be obstructionists, are far more in control at that point. Sean?
A bunch of revenue bills too. One of them would, right now the principal and the interest on the public education fund is accounted for separately and kept in different accounts, and his bill would combine them, and he says they would produce more revenue, or you could count more revenue that could be used for the budget. Is that on your radar at all? Have you thought about that? Is that something that come up at all, and if not, do you think it will come up? Is that, are you?
It may or may not be a bad idea, but it isn't something that has risen to the top of my office as we're trying to put together a budget. Senator McKinnon, I don't know if you've looked at it more.
No, Shauna, we haven't gotten to that one. We're waiting to receive the governor's tax bills, and so we certainly are asking if committees could get those out to us.
We had to remove most of the revenue language from the budget because they're bills that haven't been passed yet, so it would be inappropriate really to pass it with too much of that in there. You're always going to have a bill that has revenue sources that may not come through, and you have to work it. But when you have a whole host of taxes and those things, which are very questionable whether they'll pass or not, it's not a good idea to include them in the budget. That might be a good thing to do. It was just part of that stuff that we didn't put in the budget. And a lot of that showed up in the language. A lot of that showed up as language in the budget, which we pulled out. also, that's an amendment this afternoon, or is that in the CS? Right. Is that in the CS?
I think that we
It's
all,
already in the CS.
right, we all recognize that broadband is important and that there's a federal match that's associated with that. So that's a consideration on all of the revenue when we're looking at things that are coming in and going out. So we absolutely want to leverage where we can federal dollars to assist Alaskans, you know, in this critical time. So
I think the specific answer to your question is that it's in the CS. So it's been, for all intents and purposes, somebody could offer an amendment to take it out, but I don't see that happening.
Sorry, I was looking at the overall funds for school districts, and like, for instance, Yukon-Koyukuk, their overall state funding is like $14.5 million, and their broadband costs are almost $2 million. So it's such a huge percentage of the funding they get from the state, you know, with their broadband costs at like $1.8 million, I think they get like $1.7 million in E-rate funds, and they do contribute from their BSA to also pay. You know, the contributing part is like half comes from the school district and half comes from the broadband grants. And so, you know, I always wonder how much legislators are aware of how much smaller rural school districts get from the E-rate and how important the state match is in order for them, you know, because their budgets are so small and the broadband costs are so huge.
Senator Olson is a huge advocate of the broadband and the E-rate. He's brought that to our table multiple times, and so I know that he's spoken with me about it and that we understand the issue. Of course, it's important to rural Alaska. It's important to our budget because it leverages dollars. It's important to Alaskans because it does the right thing for a lot of people.
And we adopted it last year, and it's in the CS this year, so we recognize that, I think. I don't think there's much argument over broadband. Oh, it's huge. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is how revenue, you know, that's important when you're looking at the revenue sharing side of the house too, to look at how, what that revenue sharing is doing in individual communities. You heard testimony again in the budget process that it pays for firefighters or they're using it for public safety or for other items. So we're looking closely at what revenue sharing does in individual communities, what the dollar amount is, Shauna, as you said, but also how that is in comparison to their overall budget.
Becky?
The House, in its amendments, added money for AGDC to do technical work through pre-feed, but not for the agencies. Is that something that you're expecting to add in money for the agencies for 17 as an amendment? And then can you also speak maybe to what other sorts of amendments we might see over the next day?
Well, as far as HDC goes, we have the money in place and deployed to take us through pre-feed. So I am a little bit cautious about adding more money in, and it will be interesting to see on the House floor today how they defend that particular addition to their budget. So at this time, I'm really not interested in additional funding going for that purpose when we've already deployed those assets and they should be able to reach the completion of pre-feed. We had folks online yesterday, I believe, that thought that we should eliminate all funding to that project. I'm certainly not in that. I'm not in that camp. I think that we need to complete the pre-feed so that we understand at a higher level what it would cost to bring gas to Alaskans and then export that out into a market to provide an additional revenue stream for our state.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm in the committee nor in the legislature or in the Senate to add money to it either. I think that your sentiment is shared.
But we can't speak for other committee members. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that we've discussed that. You know, the House just finished their business, and so we're all watching, just like you are, to see why and how they're doing particular aspects of their budget. It will be interesting to see if there are amendments on the floor. I assume that the minority will have amendments and start expressing what their needs are as far as how they see there's lacking in funding in the budget or other language amendments. So, you know, our staff is following all of that as we speak now.
Anything else? Andrew?
The House Finance bill, depending on how you calculate it, cut spending from last year about $270 or $280 million give a sense as to what the number will be in the Senate?
Yeah, and you've probably heard this from Senator McKinnon and myself quite a few times. We count a little differently than the House does. The reductions that they have, I'm not going to criticize them. It's just their criteria is different from ours. When the bill comes over here and we meld the two, we should be at about $215 million by the Senate's counting of reductions. The governor was somewhere around 99. Is that right, James? 100 million with the governor's stuff by our calculations. The Senate added some, and then our subcommittees added as well. And we find ourselves now with the document that should come out before you when we meld the two of about $215 million. Now, I've said in the past, as have others in the Senate, we're looking for somewhere in the neighborhood of a $500 million cut. And I believe we'll get that. And it's pretty difficult because there's still so many moving parts, and tomorrow's kind of the day, and we're trying to get it out by the 15th. And this is going to come together rather quickly. But that's where we are. It's about 215 with Governor, House, and Senate by the time that bill gets over here. And don't know what's going to happen on the floor, but we have a pretty good anticipation that that'll be what it is.
If I could add, so there are different ways to cut the budget and different ways systematically to respond to the crisis that we're in, to the fiscal challenge that we face. And so it may be hard to quantify on a spreadsheet what the Senate will be proposing, because we're going to need the cooperation of the other body and the governor to actually implement some change systemically. Does that make sense? And so just because you might see a $300 million or $500 million reduction on undesignated general fund spending doesn't mean that there isn't other reductions happening. And I hope that you'll let Alaskans know as you cover all different events surrounding the budget that we're looking at a 30% reduction already. Last year's budget alone reduced the budget by $800 million. If you just looked at the reports, that number is over $1 billion. And that's what Senator Kelly is referring to, is the Senate is trying to be very clear with our members that a cut is really a cut and not displacement of federal dollars. And if we are going to displace federal dollars, we're going to do it systemically. And so that's why you saw Senator Kelly lead the charge on Medicaid reform and changing the system that is underlying how we're delivering services to really count those changes as cuts. And so it's more than just the spreadsheet, I guess, is what I want you to know.
And then you bring up a good point, and that is that the TERS legislation is a perfect example of that. That will be a piece of systemic change. We can accept that as a cut, though it isn't going to show up right away on anybody's spreadsheet. The legislation has to go through the process. We will make some adjustments in the bill that reflect what the end result of that bill is. Excuse me, we'll make adjustments within the operating budget bill that will reflect the ultimate outcome of that bill. Go ahead, Andrew.
500, education, criminal justice reform, Medicaid. Would it include oil and gas tax revenue?
We haven't figured that out yet. I think that's part, no, we didn't cut that.
There's a bill in committee, and we expect that bill to move. What it looks like, I don't think that anyone knows what that will look like yet, but I think that's part of the conversation.
That's one of those moving parts that I said is going to come together rather quickly. Just because it's not in there now doesn't mean that we're not dealing with it. That's one of the frustrations we have in any kind of communication with anybody. It's not a criticism of the press, but sometimes people write stories because it hasn't been done now. Well, that must mean they're not dealing with it at all. The fact is we're dealing with a lot of things that just haven't come together.
Are there major elements that I missed as far as?
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff.
Power cost equalization is going to be a conversation.
Revenue. He wanted to know are the elements that are in there that he didn't.
Well, no, I'm saying that you anticipate getting from 215 to 500. And she had your question. And so, my question is, what are the major elements that get the state from 215 to 500?
I have something in there for tax credits. There will be something in there for the TERS legislation, PERS legislation. And there's other things that I don't want to, this list is not exhaustive, there's more to come. And we'll walk you through, just as we've made it available to talk about Medicaid or about the budget, we'll walk you through those at a time here in the next few days, because it is going to go rather quickly, and I hope your schedules will allow for it. But we'll walk you through those things so that you have a pretty good understanding of them not before, but as you see them.
They are parsed out a different way. The 282 right now that the House is looking at is UGF, formula, non-formula, agency operations. So the number that you were talking about, the 215 and the 500, is there a fine point on that?
That 215 that we're talking about is UGF, with few exceptions. That's essentially what you've seen in the subcommittees, what the House did that we count, and what the governor did that we count. And again, there's more, but we don't count it that way. But there's nothing in there that has a fudge factor in it as far as that 215 isn't anticipating a bill to pass, I guess.
The statewide numbers, they just focus on agencies. So that's where I was just wondering.
If there's, we would include statewide agent numbers in that if they're included. Yeah.
Certainly, that's another cost driver, is the call for cash to the unfunded liability, and so there's a hard look at that.
The subcommittee added money back for the University of Alaska. Where do things stand with the University of Alaska?
I don't know what's happened on the floor yet. I want to see what's going on there. I know they had it. I know. I'm waiting to see what happens on the floor of the House. Yeah.
Again, we have an accelerated schedule, and so we're having to watch. That's why there might be amendments that come up that are different. Once we see how they close out, we just won't know. We're running that tightly as far as the schedule goes.
Schedule. Do people generally like how it's worked out, and do you foresee possibly doing it again next year? I mean, is it something that has made the process a little easier in terms of not being rushed and having more time to, just so that everything's not stacked up at the end and people are...
Well, that's the whole point.
Is it something you think has worked out good enough that you might want to do it again next year?
We may not be the co-chairs next year.
But in general,
ask us at day number 90.
Okay.
That was a good process.
We are rushed. We're far more rushed at this point because we're trying to get it done, and then we hope that the pressure will be eased up somewhat. So,
okay.
Yeah. James is going to have James is going to spontaneous human combust.
So different from what's happened other year in the past. What's the general impression of people on how they like it?
I think people like it. They're a little bit, it is rushing things so much. I try to tell people, and I try to tell my staff and other legislators when everybody's acting freaked out, I said, what we're all experiencing, because people have gone through this process, and we kind of get instinctive about the process, what we're all experiencing is the kind of anxiety and pressure that happens in late April or mid-April. And so our brains are saying, oh my gosh, it's the end of session, we have to hurry. And my comment is, look at the calendar. Breathe. That's a good point. Usually, that's a good point. But usually there's this sun streaming through the window and it gets hot in here. But no, I think that's a good point, and I think it is. I think generally people like it. I think people will want to repeat it. There is an element to it that is somewhat overlooked, and that is we are looking at things differently. We did get into some number scrubbing, but mostly we've acted like boards of directors. Certainly the Senate has acted more like a board of directors, and we've been far more directive rather than digging into the ledger numbers. When I was in the House years ago, I was on Senate Finance. It was about 3:30 in the morning, it was the House Finance, and it's about 3:30 in the morning, and Mark Hanley and Ben Grusendorf were arguing over a $3,600 amendment that went on probably an hour. $3,600. And I remember, I'm kind of a rookie, I didn't get it, but one thing I did get is, I thought we'd be dealing with things more important than that. So that's the kind of minutia that you can get drawn into that just wastes everyone's time. There were, not to go back and defend those guys because it's been so long and Ben is no longer even with us, but there was a reason they were arguing. It had more to do with politics. But the point is that we don't want to get drawn into that tiny detail process that can happen, and you have to look at the budget just in a different sense if you're going to impose a different calendar on it.
So if I could comment, the Senate said at our first press conference we were going to look at system change versus individual sort of trimming along the edge because of the situation that we're facing. We need big ticket item reductions or a different way to approach doing our business to actually face, the challenge that's before us. And so we said we were going to prioritize action on things that made the most difference to our bottom line, and that's why we led with Medicaid reform. And I know that it's a very complex bill, 41 pages, but it really starts the beginning of a ball rolling where we're looking at $30 million worth of overall savings in year one, and that is actual cost savings. And then as that ball continues to roll, when we get to full implementation in 2022, and maybe that's not even full, but the ball is rolling, and now in 2022, we're at almost $115 million worth of cost savings. And some of that is shifting from state dollars over to the federal government paying for some programs.
And that's not cumulative.
No, it's not cumulative.
That's $100 million in that year. Yeah, those are annual savings. Which, for the first time, Medicaid is headed in the other direction. It has never happened before. And Medicaid is the thing that eats everyone's lunch. You can argue whether it's a good program or a bad program, but the fact is that we have other things in this state to do rather than Medicaid. And if you just sat back and had enough time, eventually all you would do is Medicaid because of its rate of growth.
So the good thing about this challenge is we've had to prioritize our time, and we are doing things differently, but I'm sure some people feel the loss of doing it differently and changing the way we're approaching that because it's changed. But we've had to change based on the fiscal challenge that we're facing. Senator Kelly, I need to depart. I have a constituent actually in my office waiting for me. I don't know. Happy to take people offline at a different time.
Thank you.
Your host is exiting the conference.